Alright, this is the intro video for the book of Deuteronomy. So, I'm going to be going through the book of Deuteronomy for a while, Lord willing. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to start with the John MacArthur Study Bible for each chapter. And then after I finish the notes for the John MacArthur Study Bible for each chapter, then I'm going to look at this new book by conservative Jewish author and radio talk show host Dennis Prager. I'm going to look at his Bible commentary called the Rational Bible. And I'm going to go through his commentary on Deuteronomy. So tonight or today, depending on what time I post the video, I'm gonna do this intro for Deuteronomy for this video, and then for the next one I'm gonna do Deuteronomy chapter 1 for the MacArthur Study Bible, and then Deuteronomy 1 again for the Rational Bible from Dennis Prager on Deuteronomy. And then the cycle will continue, chapter 2 for MacArthur, and then chapter 2 for Prager. Now, with one, if it gets pretty long doing one with Prager, I may have to split it up into two parts, because sometimes he's going to have quite a bit to say in the commentary. And it may take a while to go through a chapter when I do Prager, so I may have to split it up into maybe one or two videos sometimes. But anyway, that's what's going to be going on. So here's the intro to the book of Deuteronomy. Now, the English title, Deuteronomy, comes from the Greek Septuagint mistranslation of copy of this law. In chapter 17 verse 18 of this book as second law, which was rendered Deuteronomium in the Latin translation of the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, the original Old Testament. But the Latin Vulgate is the Latin translation of the Septuagint, and the title and the English title is a mistranslation of copy of the law or second law from mistranslation from the Septuagint of the word. That means basically Deuteronomy coming from the Septuagint, but it was a mistranslation of the Greek. It was a mistranslation of the copy of this law, this second law, and so rendered Deuteronomium in the Latin Vulgate or whatever. So the Hebrew title of the book is translated, these are the words from the first two Hebrew words of the book, and the Hebrew title is a better description of the book, since this book is not a second law. So really, I guess you can say these are words of the law. Yeah, this is a re-explanation of the law, really. So, but it just got mistranslated, and you get this, but you have a mistranslation in the Septuagint, and then ultimately you got the word Deuteronomy. But this is just a record of Moses' explanation concerning the law. And Deuteronomy completes the 5-part literary unit called the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books. So Penta 5. So 5 books, or pentagon shape with 5 sides. So, alright, and then Moses has been recognized as the author of Deuteronomy since the book itself testifies that Moses wrote it. And then the Old and the New Testament support the claim that Moses wrote this. Now, Deuteronomy 32:48 through 34:12, that was added after Moses' death, probably added by Joshua. The rest of this book came from Moses' hand just before his death, around 1405 BC. And the majority of the book is comprised of farewell speeches that the 120-year-old Moses gave to Israel, beginning on the first day of the 11th month of the 40th year after the Exodus from Egypt. And these speeches can be dated around January or February 1405 BC. Now, in the last few weeks of Moses' life, he committed these speeches to writing and gave them to the priests and elders for the coming generations of Israel. Like Leviticus, Deuteronomy does not advance historically, but it takes place entirely in one location over about a month of time. And Israel was encamped in the central Rift Valley to the east of the Jordan River, and this location was referred to in Numbers 36:13, which is the final verse of the book of Numbers, as the plains of Moab. So referring to that Rift Valley east of the Jordan River. And it's an area north of the Arnon River across the Jordan River from Jericho. It has been almost 40 years since the Israelites had exited Egypt. So the book of Deuteronomy so it concentrates on the events that took place in the final weeks of Moses' life. And the major event was the verbal communication of the divine revelation from Moses to the people of Israel. The only other events recorded were Moses' recording of the law in a book and his commissioning of Joshua as the new leader. That's in chapter 31. And then Moses' viewing of the land of Canaan from Mount Nebo and his death. So those are pretty much the only parts that are narratives, I guess you could say. And then the book of and then the original recipients of Deuteronomy, both in its verbal and written presentations, were the second generation of the nation of Israel. And all that generation from 40 to 60 years of age, except for Joshua and Caleb, who were older. They had been born in Egypt and had participated as children or teens in the Exodus. And those who were under 40 had been born and reared in the wilderness. And together they comprised the generation that was on the verge of conquering the Promised Land, conquering the land of Canaan under Joshua 40 years after they left Egypt. And like Leviticus, Deuteronomy contains much legal detail, but with an emphasis on the people rather than the priests. As Moses called the second generation of Israel to trust the Lord and to be obedient to his covenant that he made with them at Mount Horeb or Sinai, he illustrated his points with references to Israel's past history. He reminded Israel of her rebellion against the Lord at Horeb, at Kadesh, which brought devastating consequences. And he reminded her of the Lord's faithfulness in giving her victory over her enemies. And more importantly, Moses called the people to take the land that God had promised by the oath to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses not only looked back, but he also looked ahead and saw that Israel's future would be a failure to obey God, and that would lead to Israel being scattered among the nations before the fulfillment of his oath to the patriarchs would be completed. So Moses is going to find out that they're not going to obey God, and they are going to turn away from him. So, and they do, and you see that play out throughout the Old Testament, and ultimately why they end up in Assyrian and Babylonian exile. And even after they get restored after the Babylonian exile, they're still not going to be obedient. So even in Jesus' day, they reject him and crucify him. You hand him over to be crucified. And then the book of Deuteronomy, along with the Psalms and Isaiah, reveals much about the attributes of God. Thus, it is directly quoted over 40 times in the New Testament, exceeded by only Psalms and Isaiah, with many more allusions to its content. So Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Psalms are really kind of some of the main books quoted in the New Testament. And Jesus quotes from Deuteronomy some also. And probably Deuteronomy 6 might be his favorite chapter because he quotes from it like several times. Twice when he's being tempted by Satan. So, and I'm going to get to, Lord willing, when I get to Deuteronomy 6, I'm going to get to those verses that he used to fight against Satan when Satan was tempting him. And Deuteronomy reveals that the Lord is the only God and that he is a jealous God. He's faithful, he's loving, he's merciful, but yet he's angered by sin. And this is the God who called Israel to himself. And over 250 times Moses repeated the phrase, "The Lord your God," to Israel. Israel was called to obey, fear, love, and serve her God by walking in his ways and in keeping his commandments. And by obeying him, the people of Israel would receive his blessings. Obedience in the pursuit of personal holiness is always based upon the character of God. Because of who he is, because he is holy, therefore his people are to be holy. Be holy as God is holy. Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Even though, of course, we can't do that, and that's why we need a Savior. Now, there are some interpretive challenges for Deuteronomy. First, is the book a single record, or is it only a part of the larger literary whole, the Pentateuch? Now, the remainder of Scripture always views the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, as a unit, and the ultimate meaning of Deuteronomy cannot be divorced from its context in the Pentateuch. And this book also assumes that the reader is already familiar with the other 4 books that precede it. In fact, Deuteronomy brings into focus all that has been revealed in Genesis to Numbers, as well as its implications for the people as they entered the land. However, every available Hebrew manuscript divides the Pentateuch exactly in the same way as the present text, indicating that the book is a well-defined unit recounting the final speeches of Moses to Israel. So it may also be viewed as a singular record. And second, another interpretive challenge. Also, is the structure of Deuteronomy based on the secular treaties of Moses' day? Now, during the last 35 years, many evangelical scholars have supported the Mosaic authorship of Deuteronomy by appealing to the similarities between the structure of the book and the ancient Near Eastern treaty form of the mid-century, of the mid-second millennium BC, the approximate time of Moses. And these secular treaties followed a set pattern not used in the mid-first millennium BC. And these treaties contain the following elements: preamble, which is identifying the parties to the covenant, and then second, historical prologue, a history of the king's dealings with his vassals, and then 3 general and specific stipulations, and 4 witnesses, 5 blessings and cursings, and 6 oaths and covenant ratification. In Deuteronomy, it is believed, approximates this basic structure. While there is agreement that chapter 1, verses 1 through 5 is a preamble, 1:5 through 4:43 is a historical prologue, and chapters 27 and 28 feature the blessings and the cursings. And there is no consensus as to how the rest of Deuteronomy fits this structure. While there might have been a covenant renewal on the plains of Moab, this is neither clearly explicit nor implicit in Deuteronomy. So it is best to take the book from what it claims to be the explanation of the law given by Moses for the new generation of Israelites. The structure follows the speeches given by Moses. So we're going to see this when we take a look at the outline. And third and finally, what was the covenant made in the land of Moab? The majority opinion posits this covenant as a renewal of the Sinaitic covenant made nearly 40 years before the first generation. With the first generation. Here, Moses supposedly updated and renewed the same covenant with the second generation of Israel. The second view sees this covenant as a Palestinian covenant, which guarantees the nation of Israel's right to the land, both at that time and in the future. And then a third position is that Moses, in chapters 29 and 30, anticipated the new covenant, since he knew Israel would fail to keep the Sinaitic covenant. And the third view seems to be, best with what was the covenant made in the land of Moab, where they were here. So, in that area, probably anticipating the new covenant, probably. Alright, now here's a basic outline of the book. So you have the introduction, the historical setting of Moses' speeches, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and then the first address by Moses, a historical prologue. This is 1:5 through 4:43, and then these. So that's the second major section of the book, and here's some of the subsections. First, you have an historical review of God's gracious acts from Horeb to Beth Peor. This is in 1:5 through 3:29. And then an exhortation to obey the law. This is in 4:1 through 40. And then the setting apart of the 3 cities of refuge, 4:41 through 43. So there's the second major section. So the first is that introduction, and then the first address, number 2. Number 3, the second address, the stipulations of the Sinaitic covenant. This is going to take up the majority of the book. This is 4:44 through 28:68. And chapter 28 is the longest chapter in the book. So, and then the subsection, you have an introduction to 4:44 through 49. So the final verses in chapter 4. And then the second section, subsection, is basic elements of Israel's relationship with the Lord. This is from 5 through, this is from 5 all the way through the end of 11. So 5 through 11. So you got the 10 Commandments in chapter 5. You got the total commitment to the Lord in chapter 6. And then chapter 7, separation from the gods of the other nations. 8, you have warning against forgetting the Lord. And then 9 through 10, 11, you have illustrations of Israel's rebellion in the past. And then 10, 12 through the end of 11, and admonition to fear and love the Lord and to obey His will. So that's the first major subsection of the second address. And then the other subsection of that second address from 4 through 28 is this section, the specific stipulations for life in the new land. This is from 12 all the way through 26. So chapters 12 through 26. So in 12 through 16, 17, you have instructions for the life of worship. And then 16 through 18, instructions for leadership. And then instructions for societal order. That's 19 through 23:14. And then instructions for miscellaneous laws. That's 23:15 through all of 25. And then the first fruits and tithes in the land, that's 26, 1 through 15. And then the affirmation of obedience, that's 26, 16 through 19. Alright, so that's the second, that's the third major subsection here. So you got the intro for this part, and then in the second address, the intro, and then basic elements and specific stipulations. And then the final part of the second address is the blessings and the curses, which is 27 through 28. And then finally, the third major section of the book is the third address by Moses, another covenant. This is from 29 through 30. So probably the new covenant. Maybe. Yeah, I'll get to that. We'll see what goes on there, Lord willing. And then the final section of the book, the concluding events, 31 through 34. And then 31, 1 through 8, you got the change of leadership. Joshua will become the new leader of Israel. And then future reading of the law, that's 31, 9 through 13. And then Song of Moses, you got 31, 14 through 32, 47. And then and then here's some parts of that subsection. the anticipation of Israel's failure, 31:14 through 29, and the witness of Moses' song, 31:30 through 32:43, and then the communicating of Moses' song, 32:44 through 47. So, and then the final events of Moses' life, 32:48 through all of 34. So there's only 12 verses in chapter 34. So we got the directives for Moses' death. That's the end of 32. And the blessing of Moses, that's all of 33. And then the death of Moses, that's all of 34. And that's it. That's the outline of the book of Deuteronomy. And without further ado, let's get into this and get to chapter 1.